A Michigan water crisis we should all worry about. Have Republicans lost their minds targeting Planned Parenthood and the end of an era in Dearborn? It's analysis of the stories that you're talking about. MiWeek starts right now.
Detroit Public TV is supported by Business Leaders for Michigan, announcing open registration for the Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac, Detroit. Keynote speaker is Tom Kelly, leader of a global design firm helping organizations innovate and grow. Motivational speakers, networking opportunities, and creative inspiration. That's the Business Leaders for Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac. Info at businessleadersformichigan.com/events. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. We begin tonight with a water crisis in Flint that frankly should have everyone's attention. Doctors recently found high levels of lead in children in Flint, and it coincides with a switch in the water system. The city has been getting water from the Flint River for over a year because it's waiting to hook up to a new water system that is still under construction. Now, the state says the water meets state and federal standards, but in a year since the water switch, the number of kids with above average lead levels has doubled and in some cases tripled. And to be blunt, according to the CDC, there is no such thing as a safe level of lead exposure, which leads to irreparable damage in children. Governor Snyder said this week that there were, quote, probably things that weren't fully understood when the city switched to Flint water. It is a story where aging infrastructure combined with a financially strapped city has led to an awful situation for residents who have no choice. We are starting there tonight with our MiWeek contributors Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, it's good to see you and to talk about this because the problems with the Flint water and the switch over have been happening now for over a year. There's been problems with the smell of the water. There's been problems with E. coli. There's been a lot of advisories and even, violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so now we're at this point where doctors are saying, look what we found. Look what we're seeing now in children. And to me, this news is devastating. Nolan, I'm going to start with you. What kind of situation has the state gotten themselves into?
Well, I mean, it's clearly a health crisis, and it should be addressed that way. The governor has been distributing quietly, I guess, about 1,500 filters. They need to do a whole lot more than that. People shouldn't have to drink water that's dangerous, and it's dangerous for their children. And they probably made a mistake in cutting off from the Detroit system before they got their own pipeline finished into Lake Huron. They're drawing it out of that filthy river. The river has been polluted by industry and residential pollution for 100 years or more. And so, it's an uncertain process trying to take all those chemicals out. And, you got people turning on their tap and seeing water that's just putrid. And, it doesn't do any good to test it and tell them, oh, well, it's safe to drink. Nobody's going to drink water that looks like that.
Well, you know what? And people can say, well, I don't want to drink the water that looks like that. But the bottom line here is a lot of people have no choice. You're looking at a city where you've got 41% of the people are below poverty level. And this is the choice that they have when they turn on their tap.
Well, but even if if you're wealthy, what choice do you have but to use the water that comes through the pipes to your house? I mean,
yeah, but you can. What I'm saying is, if you have money, you can buy bottled water. Okay, so if you're wealthy, you can have whatever kind of water trucked into you.
Yeah,
that's my point that I make.
But even that seems an unreasonable burden for anybody to be bearing. I mean, the idea that you go to the tap, turn it on, and can fill it up with water and drink it is a pretty foregone conclusion in this country. We assume that, and we pay for it. It's not acceptable that they can't do that in Flint and haven't been able to do that for some time. I think the question that we've been focused on at the Free Press this week is how did this happen, and why was there not more due diligence done to figure out what would or might happen when they switched? And part of this is caught up in the fact that Flint has had an emergency manager for so long. And, I think there are real questions. I'm a supporter of the emergency manager law. I think it's a necessity in a state where the state assumes all the financial responsibility for local government. At the same time, I think giving one person that much power is always a little dangerous. And here, I think it's possible that somebody made a decision.
Do you really think he made a decision, though, in a vacuum, though?
I don't think he made it in a vacuum, but I do think there was not the kind of push and pull and the process that you would normally have if elected officials were making that decision. And so I think, it should give us real pause about how much power these emergency managers have. I think we've become sort of accustomed to using Detroit as the model for emergency management because it worked so well here, but that was an anomaly. I mean, there was a lot more resources plowed into that process here than you see in a place like Flint, and so this is a consequence of that happening, and we got to sort of sit down and figure out how to prevent it.
This is also a consequence of it, yeah, a city that doesn't have money, and I think the city council was really pushing in the spring and saying, hey, we want to get hooked back up to the Detroit system.
Well, they can't
in the interim, and they said, well, $12 million, we don't have $12 million
and that's
to be able to do
so
that.
in theory, it was a good plan. It saved them about $12 million a year. So they, then ultimately it will be a good plan once they get that pipeline built out to Lake Huron.
Yeah.
But they shouldn't have switched. So they shouldn't have switched until that pipeline was on.
But that's
in theory,
fear.
Okay,
that's
so
hindsight.
you're going to say in theory it was good. They saved $12 million, and I agree. You're going to save money in the long run. I worked up in Flint back in '98 to 2000, and from then on, people were talking about we've got to get off the Detroit system. We're at the end of the line. We've got to figure out another way to do that. So yes, kudos to them for finally stepping forward and saying we're going to hook up to this new pipeline. But my thing is that you saved $12 million right now, not staying on the Detroit system until that pipeline was fixed and linking up. How much money are you going to spend now that you have a population of younger children that now have some kind of lead in their system, that now have maybe decreased IQ?
Well,
they're going to be coming up in a school system that maybe isn't equipped to handle them. That, to me, is a public health crisis that you're going to be paying for $12 million times $12 million.
And that's why they need to either reconnect until they get that pipeline built or get these filters out.
So they can't.
Apparently
they can't reconnect because the pipe that they were using to connect to to DWSD doesn't belong to them anymore. That was sold to Genesee County, and so they don't really have a lot of options. I mean, you are stuck on that system until the next system is ready, unless you want to build a new pipe into DWSD, which would cost
they didn't destroy that pipe.
Well, but they don't own it, and so they can't.
No,
use
but
it.
I mean, you can work through the politics of it, and ultimately, when they get that pipeline next year from Lake Huron, they're going to be okay. In the meantime, they need to get filters out to these homes or reconnect.
And let's talk about that filter system. Go ahead, Steve.
I mean, the fear here, I think, is that it gets to the core of the emergency manager law. I think the outside risk of emergency management is that you have somebody in who makes decisions based on short-term economics over things that cities have to do, public safety, public health, things like that. And I think this is the worst example we have seen to date of that.
This wasn't forced on Flint. There was support. There was support in the political structure.
They liked it too
in Flint for this. So this was an example of they forced a decision on the elected officials. They just made a decision they didn't think was going to turn out this way, and it did. Now they have to deal with it.
Let's talk about a little bit of the politics and the optics of this, Nolan. And you referred to those 1,500 water filters that the governor's office and the administration helped get to people through this, and I wrote this down, the Concerned Pastors for Social Action. So when a donation came into the state from an anonymous donor saying, here, take these filters and make sure that they're passed out to the community. And these pastors said the Snyder administration told them to keep it quiet where this came from and to not say that they were involved. Why would that be if the water was okay?
Well, because they only had 10% of the filters they needed. And I think they didn't want to create a stampede. I don't know why they did it that way, but I mean, this is a problem that's got to be solved. I would expect the next day or two you're going to hear the governor's office say we're going to give filters to everybody if they can get that many filters.
Yeah, it's a little late.
Is it too little too?
It's
okay,
a little late.
There's my question. Is it too little too late?
Well, you got to do it. I mean, you can't keep this water coming into people's houses.
But I think there's a potential.
It's never too late to fix a problem.
So the potential downside for the governor is you knew the water was bad. You participated in a small-scale effort to help, kept it quiet while thousands of other people suffered. If I'm Governor Snyder, I don't want to answer for that. I mean, he doesn't have to run for election again, but that kind of negligence in the chief executive's office, I think, is pretty significant and ought to be accounted for somehow.
So how do you think that they're going to respond to this, Nolan, and how would you tell them to respond to this?
I think they're going to get those filters to folks. I think that's the quickest
You got to do that.
solution. You got to do that, and hopefully that'll carry them over until they've got a better source of water in that system.
Okay, so you have filters. Any other expenditures? I mean, can we expect some kind of lump sum coming towards Flint in any way, shape, or form to help them out with this?
I don't know. I mean, and again, the question is, what would you do? The pipe that connected to them DWSD is not available to them anymore, and so they really are stuck with the situation they have until this new system that they're building comes online. And that's not a money question; it's a practicality one. So I don't know what another solution might look like.
You know, it just shakes my head. Anytime you think of families that really don't have a choice, and in this whole matter, and you've got children who are being raised in this environment, and we've created now this next generation of problems for ourselves, and for these families. And it's just I'll be very interested to hear what comes out of the governor's office this week. And
Well,
I think a lot of people in Flint will be as well.
say that I've been pretty disappointed in the governor's sort of dancing around this all week. Didn't admit that there was a problem until middle of the week when this report came out more than a week ago. I mean, there is an obtuseness going on here as well to how serious this is for the people who live in Flint.
All right, last word on this, Nolan?
I think they'll come up with a solution, but in the meantime, we've got to get people clean water. They should be trucking water in and trucking bottled water in, just like they would do, if there were a natural disaster.
So do we have to wait for some kind of private entity to step up? Are you going to see corporations? Or are you going to
they
see
already
someone?
are.
Whether
I'm sure
FEMA
that'll
or
be
somebody
part of
might come and help. I don't know. It depends on.
That was sort of a self-inflicted disaster. I don't know if they will or not.
Yeah, well, the reminder is there is no such safe level for any kind of lead exposure for children.
No.
There is no safe level. So, all right, we'll see how this continues to unfold. Moving on now, Republicans looking to pull funding from Planned Parenthood have Washington whipped up. You like that alliteration, gentlemen? They almost shut the government down over it. They pushed the Speaker of the House to resign over it. But here's the interesting part for you. A USA Today poll, a couple of other polls show 65% of Americans want funding to continue for Planned Parenthood. Nolan, have Republicans lost their minds targeting Planned Parenthood like this? What's the strategy
Well, they've
behind
made a
this?
political miscalculation again, I think, on this. They should have kept the debate focused on late-term abortions. I think that's an important discussion to have, and I think that's where they had the American people's support. What's the point of viability? What sort of regulations are needed to make sure there's no exploitation and make sure we're not killing viable fetuses? They had the American people there. When they turned it on Planned Parenthood, all of a sudden then they played right into the Democratic narrative that there's a war on women, and you don't hear anybody talking about late-term abortions. All you hear about is the war on women. They should have known that. They've been through this before, and yet they just keep plunging down that road.
Another thing that crossed my mind this week in looking at the hearings that happened with Cecile Richards, who's the head of Planned Parenthood, was just how hearings have become just a show
It's a circus,
and a waste of time. Quite
yeah,
honestly.
no, something like this is a waste of time because in the end, they're not going to pull funding. I mean, there's no way they will do that. The consequences at the polls next year would be absolutely devastating if they did. This is about raising money, right? And I guess I would disagree with Nolan a little bit about the foolishness of this. In a lot of ways, the opponents of Planned Parenthood have managed to win that war on one side of the equation. Think about how think about how we define the terms, right? People call it partial birth abortion. I was surprised that you used the term late-term abortion, which is the proper term, but most people call it partial birth abortion. That is a sign of the winning rhetoric of the anti-Planned Parenthood forces that I think matters. And when they do this kind of thing, they are raising money on their side of the aisle. I mean, there are a lot of people who are really upset with that issue and some others that Planned Parenthood is involved in. I think they may have pushed it too far because now you're sitting there talking about pulling funding, and I don't think a majority of Americans support that. But I do think that there is something peculiar about the way Republicans return to this issue again and again. And I don't think it's to sort of sink themselves. There is some advantage here, and they have won the rhetorical war over this issue in some way.
It's going to. It plays right into the narrative of that there's a war on women. That's all anybody's talking about. That's not the issue.
So why are they doing it?
Well, that's a good question, and there's a lot of people in the party who are asking that question. John Boehner asked that question.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Why not focus on, keep your eyes on the prize, if you will, and not pick divisive fights?
So were you surprised when he then suddenly resigned, that
Well,
this was kind of the last straw that pushed him?
I don't know if this was the last straw or there was other things going on. I think everybody was surprised by the Boehner resignation. I think, again, I wrote last week that the party's divided on multiple planes, and if it's got an excellent opportunity with the Democrats sort of in disarray to retake the White House, but it can't retake the White House as long as it's fighting. They're fighting with each other. They just can't.
And they're fighting with each other going into an election year as well, and people are watching this. And of course, they averted the government shutdown. They pushed it, till December 11th. But Stephen, what do you see coming out of this?
Well, I mean, I think again, the advantage keeps going to the people who are pushing this. Think of the presidential candidates who are in Congress who keep talking about this. There's a reason they keep doing that, and I think that they smell some advantage in the polls by continuing to raise this issue, and that's why they're doing it. I don't think it's as self-destructive as the popular narrative has it. I think if you push it too far, it will be, and obviously you can't pull funding. But for now, before you get into people actually showing up and voting at the polls in January and February, I think this is part of their bread and butter politics.
All right, well, in Dearborn this week, the statue of ex-mayor Orville Hubbard, known for his racially divisive views when he led the city for 36 years, was taken down from in front of City Hall. Compared to the Confederate flag debate in the South this summer, Dearborn residents called for it to be removed, and it will now have a home at the Dearborn Historical Museum. This was interesting to watch this week. Stephen, I'm going to start with you, because I actually heard you guys were talking about it on your radio show in Detroit today on WDET, and you got some pretty interesting callers. And what were some of the feelings, I think, from people in Dearborn when this happened?
Well, I mean, I think they're of mixed feelings, and let's be clear, Orville Hubbard is a person with a mixed history, as most people are. He was, by most accounts, a very good mayor, ran the city very efficiently, as Bill McGraw, who was the guest on that segment, pointed out. Coleman Young used to praise Orville Hubbard for the way he ran Dearborn, the way he managed the city. But at the same time, this was somebody who had really awful racist views as a person, and used those views to shape policy in what was the largest suburb in the metro area for a very long time. And so, I think the question here is always about context. How do we tell the story of who Orville Hubbard is? Is it just with a statue that makes him look like a general or a president, or is it in a museum where you can deal with his accomplishments and deal with his foibles? And I think that's what people in Dearborn who are calling the show really want, is they want to be able to be honest about what this was and sort of put it behind them, which I think having the statue out in front of City Hall didn't allow.
Are we able to put things in context now, Nolan?
I think the way Dearborn handled this was the way they should be. They recognize that there's mixed feelings about Orville Hubbard and that his record was mixed. He did build a great city. I mean, he exploited this gold mine he had in Ford Motor Company. Sure. For the benefit of his residents. They had, middle-class people had sort of country club parks, and it was a great city. It's still a great city, and the people of Dearborn resolved this in a way that everyone could live with. I mean, they resolved it in the least divisive way, in a way that shouldn't generate resentment. And I think that should be the goal here, and they've pulled it off. I covered Hubbard as a young reporter, and he was
well, how did he treat you? Did he yell at you, Nolan?
No, no, that wouldn't have been Coleman Young. No, Hubbard was extraordinarily charming, old school politician, truly larger than life. And a lot of people still in Dearborn remember him as sort of the father of the city. So,
you know, we mentioned his name when we were talking about the Confederate flag issues down south when that cropped up this summer, and we were talking about Kid Rock and whatnot. So are there any other things in Southeast Michigan, in the metro area? Are there any more statues? Are there any more figures that need to be, I guess, need to be addressed like this?
Well, I mean, I think the way, whether they need to be addressed is one thing. I think a separate question is, do we have other things that fall in this category? And that's an unequivocal yes. Cobo Hall, that was one of the examples that Bill McGraw pointed out on the show, named for a mayor who was also a notorious racist, who was responsible for some of the really awful segregationist policies in the city before Jerry Kavanaugh was mayor. You know, I mean, it depends on how far you want to push this stuff. We have streets named for slaveholders in the metro area. Are those worth thinking about, talking about, putting in some context? Maybe. I think at some point, you know, this country still has a whole lot of reckoning to do with awful things that were done in the past and the vestiges of those things that we see around us today. I don't see a problem with doing it. I don't think it has to be an accusatory or a finger-pointing kind of exercise. It can be an effort to get people to understand that these things happen and that they had consequences.
Well, I think you start stripping George Washington's name off cities and
So
streets,
taking off,
and Jefferson's, you're going to rip this country right apart. And I think that's the lesson we should take from Dearborn. They did it in a way that didn't breed the sort of resentment and hostility.
Right.
A city that has admirably, I mean, Dearborn has admirably handled its transitioning, its integration. They're doing well there. I mean, it's still a remarkable community, as it has been through much of its history.
All right, we just have a couple minutes left on the show, guys, and two things I want to throw out there that I kind of want to watch for in this next week or so. Taking a look at Macomb County and the lawsuit that they're facing in terms of they had an inmate in their jail system that was suffering from mental illness, and the family is accusing the jail of essentially not getting his meds to him, and so he went in withdrawal and he died while he was in custody. And Macomb County's looking, and specifically Mark Hackle, the county executive, and talking about these jails, the way we have the system right now. They're not equipped to deal with the amount of mentally challenged, mentally ill people that are coming into the system, and also people who have substance abuse problems. And so, Nolan, I know that you're also keeping an eye on that as well. I mean, that's a larger issue, I think, that we're facing in prison systems as well.
Well, I mean, there's a much bigger issue here, and I would invite you to read. Caitlin Buss had a column in our paper today about the pay-to-stay policy. It's unconstitutional. And to say to folks, well, gosh, you've got to pay this traffic fine or we're going to lock you up, that's against federal law. That's what it is. And it's against federal law and it's against state law, and yet it still continues in many Michigan communities. And that, I think, is the bigger issue here. People who can't pay a fine, do you lock them up or do you find some alternative means of punishment? And, you know, locking a person like this up, whether he's mentally ill or not mentally ill, it would clearly seem to violate the Constitution and state law. Do
we need to revamp an intake system and how we're dealing with it?
I think we need to deal better with the fact that we have placed the entire burden of dealing with mental illness almost entirely on the correction system, which is not where it belongs, and we don't fund the correction system in a way that would allow them to deal with it in a rational manner. I mean, as Mark Hackle pointed out this week, they contract out those medical services. It's not even jail staff or county staff that's doing it. It's somebody that they can get the lowest bid from. That makes no sense at all, and that's how something like this ends up happening.
And real quick, also coming out that broke last night, State Rep Alberta Tinsley Talabi now is being looked at and investigated in relation to the bribery and kickback scandal at City Hall. You know, it's netted, what, 38 convictions of everyone. She has not been charged with anything yet, but we are now watching this unfold.
Yeah, yet another.
I kind of thought it was over, but
to be clear, it's an informant saying she did this. Yeah. So and she's not been charged.
She has not been charged. I did say that.
I don't know.
But her name.
Well, the court documents would suggest there were bribes paid. I mean, that was.
I mean, this is what this informant is saying.
Well, I think that's what the investigation revealed. Now they don't know yet what her role in the solicitation was, but bribes were paid. I mean, it's another legislator gone bad. I don't know what, when we're going to come to the recognition that we've got to change our system here. We are not putting quality people in Lansing.
Well, and again, she has not been charged. She is being investigated in connection with that.
Lots of people get investigated.
Lots of people get investigated. All right, so we'll be watching those things this week. Guys, thanks so much. I appreciate it. And that is going to do it for My Week. Make sure you go to MiWeek.org right now for My Week after the show. We're going to continue to talk about the week's headlines, and it's something that you won't see on TV, so make sure you join us for that. You can also find us on Facebook and on Twitter. We are there. We want to hear from you, what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show, and what you'd like to hear us talk about. That's going to do it for My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. We will see you next time. Take care.
Detroit Public TV is supported by Business Leaders for Michigan, announcing open registration for the Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac Detroit. Topics include trends that could affect your bottom line and how well Michigan is doing in attracting and growing good-paying jobs. A great lineup of speakers, networking opportunities, and creative inspiration. That's the Business Leaders for Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac. Info at businessleadersformichigan.com/events. Funding is also provided by Delta,